Okay, so some things to note from the video, and I want to get back to whether Pride and Prejudice is a romance or a comedy of manners. The deal is, Elizabeth Bennet and Fitzwilliam Darcy are considered one of the greatest literary couples ever written, but their relationship is so vastly different from who you just read, Catherine and Heathcliff. Like, it doesn't look at all like that relationship. So there is that element of romance, but it is a long time in the making. The comedy of manners is really what Jane Austen is known better for, simply because she's somewhat mocking the era that she lived in. I wanted to talk, I made reference to it a few minutes ago, entailment. Entailment, the process meant that land and property and houses go to the nearest living male relative. So in the story, Mr. Bennet has all of these daughters, and he has a really nice home, but he cannot give it to any of his daughters. And the nearest living male is like a cousin who's a clergyman, and he's like greasy and like disgusting, and nobody kind of likes him very much. And so the property will go to him. So one of the thoughts is, well, maybe we could at least marry one of the 5 daughters off to him, and then they get to at least stay here. But everybody else, I mean, it seems frivolous and ridiculous because we can't relate to it, but if you imagine the heaviness on a mother and father to say, the only way that my daughters are well provided for ever is for them to get married into a wealthy family. You know, that was the hope for them. And so you see the mother obsessed with marrying off her daughters, and the oldest is written as this sort of classic, refined, intelligent, free spirit, and she's like, I won't marry unless I'm in love, you know. And so that's kind of to get you started on Pride and Prejudice. Now have a look at your handout. Did everybody get one? Anybody not?
I don't have one.
There you are. Anyone else? Okay. All right, so a truth universally known comes from the first line of Pride and Prejudice. It is a truth universally known that a good man who holds a fortune must be in want of a wife. And so it starts off ironically, just because a man has money doesn't mean he's in search for a wife, but that is the opening line of the whole play. Life and Times, I'm going to give you a few things under each one. She was born in 1775, so her stories are set in the late 1700s, early 1800s. She was the 7th of 8 kids. And there is some challenge to label her as Victorian or romantic because of a bit of an overlap there. Under places of significance, I'll only mention 2. The video talked about a few more, but Chawton, Chawton, and Bath, or Bath, if you live in England. So Chawton, we will not make our way to. It is in the southern part of England. When you meet our tour director, Matt Billett, he's actually from that area, so near the coast of southern England. And so the house stands where she did a lot of her writing and spent kind of the later years of her life. And she was in Bath a relatively short amount of time. Growing up, she just spent time there on holidays, visiting grandparents. But after the death of her father, the family actually moves there for a while. So 2 of her novels are certainly set there, and there's some strong references in Pride and Prejudice that reference the area. So Bath is where we will go. And I think I've told you before, like we say Bath, they say Bath, but they say pasta and we say pasta. So your A's are always going to be wrong when you're there. Bath is where our tour director lives, and I mention him in conjunction to this because he's lived in both places that we think of with Jane Austen. In fact, I've been to his house and he lives on the same street that Jane Austen lived when she lived there, in these beautiful apartments down a really remarkable street across from the museum. High lux. Anyway, Bath was created to be a sort of spa area dating back to the Romans. So there are lots of Roman ruins in the area of Bath. And the reason is because of the hot springs. Hot mineral waters come up out of the ground. So the Romans built these huge spas that they thought, well, you'll learn a lot about it later, but they thought that the waters had healing powers and it would rejuvenate them, make them more youthful. So if you had a lot of money or you were royal, you could just go stay there. What I love about Bath is it's still that, but much higher, because of course the Roman remains are way beneath ground now, but you can they've dug enough that you can go under and see, and you'll spend a day or a morning kind of exploring that. But now there are modern pools and amenities that are still very resort-like. In fact, in your free time, if you want, you could go to the bathhouse, and there are indoor pools, outdoor pools, rooftop pools, spa-like cylinders with different smells, like a eucalyptus one, and it's the most relaxing place ever. It would cost you about $40 to go in for a couple of hours, but that is one option for you there. So I love that it's still true to the place. You can also go in and sample, like drink the mineral waters if you want. It's like drinking a cup of vitamins, but it tastes like sulfur to me, but do what you want. The locals do it every day. Regency England. A regent is someone who serves as a proxy, like they take place of a person who is incompetent to do their job. Okay, so King George III had a bit of a disease, and they called it porphyria, which is interesting because that's also a woman's name. But he had this disease, and ultimately it was decided his brain wasn't functioning well enough to lead the country. So his son serves as proxy. So he's not made king right away. Still, George III is the official king, but his proxy or regent is called Prince Regent. He later became King George IV. Okay. So it is because of them that we refer to this era as Regency England. Regency named from the Prince Regent, the one in proxy for the king. And so the reign from the end of George III through George IV and later his brother, that whole era, 1811 to 1820 was when the Prince Regent ruled, and that is considered really the height of the Regency era. Let's talk about the works by Jane Austen. The first one is the one that honor students will read. Everyone will watch the movie, Pride and Prejudice. The second one is Sense and Sensibility, probably her second most famous novel. And if you find that you like Jane Austen, I recommend the 1995 movie with Emma Thompson. It is long, but lovely. It's a chick flick though. Letter C is Emma. You might have heard of Emma before because Clueless is a loose take on it. Emma is all about matchmaking, and then the matchmaker is hit by Cupid's arrow, so to speak. There are a couple of good movies. The Gwyneth Paltrow one is well known, but there's a very recent one, I want to say 2015, that's really much better. It's well done. Northanger Abbey is the next one, and that one is completely set in Bath. And then you see Persuasion, and finally Mansfield Park. Mansfield, one word. Now there were other works that she wrote, like she had an epistolary novel, which means like epistles, you know, from the Bible, it's letters. So it is a novel written in the form of letters, and in 2016, they created a film largely following Lady Susan, but it's called Love and Friendship. Has anyone seen it? Kate Beckinsale? Beckinsale? Anyway, it's funny. It's a dialogue-heavy movie, so you have to really listen. You can't kind of be doing something else while you're doing that. Universal appeal and modern trend. First, let's talk about themes in her works. Education and reading. Individual and society. Morality. Politics. Religion. Property and class. And gender, to name a few. And those are really more topics. You know, when I'm saying theme, I really mean a universal message, but we would then have to explore each individual work and what specifically it's saying about each of those things. But for now, those are the general topics that her works concern. There's nothing you have to record under books and movies and events, but I just want to talk to you about it for a minute. Have you ever heard the term Austinolatry? It's the idolatry, the idol worship of Jane Austen. What that means is that she has become such a trend that she's like a pop icon herself. So many books and movies have been made as spin-offs of her writings, and her fame keeps tending to grow more and more as time goes on. That doesn't always happen with authors. Sometimes they're more popular around their own time and then people sort of forget about them. Now there is like Jane Austen is at the height of her fame right now. So many books have been written, especially sequels to Pride and Prejudice, but I can't bear them because when I start reading them I'm like, you don't sound like Jane Austen at all. Like, I just have too high an expectation. Like I want them to succeed, but they just don't. Like, she was a genius. Good luck. But there were others like Clueless, Bridget Jones' Diary, which I certainly can't recommend, but they were based on Jane Austen stories. You saw in the film Bride and Prejudice. And then do you know about Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, released a couple of years ago? So you know I actually really love it. And I know you weren't expecting me to say that, but it is the characterization is accurate. The dialogue is very close to accurate. It is the story of Pride and Prejudice plus the undead. So if you like scary things, you might like it after you read it. Also, it's like The Walking Dead. I mean, it's not quite as gory as Walking Dead, but it's, yeah. Zombies. There are some others, the Jane Austen Book Club, I forget another one, Jane Austen's World or something. They're ridiculous. I mean, it's just that people are trying to make a buck off of Jane Austen. I was walking through Lifeway Christian the other day, and there's like a devotional journal based on the writings and themes of Jane Austen. I'm like, why didn't I think of that? Like, everybody wants a little bit of Jane Austen right now. There is also, I have to recommend the movie Becoming Jane. It is the story of her own life and how she never married. It's not to say she never fell in love, but things just never worked out. Plus, she died at a fairly young age of 41. I love in the clip that you saw, you got to see that little writing table where she wrote so many of her novels. But can you imagine the distractions every time you hear the door creak, you cover it up? I'm not doing anything. Because it wasn't popular for women to write during this time. The few women writers that there were published without a name because nobody would buy their stuff. They would turn up their noses like, a woman writer? Why would we want to read that, you are only reading 2 female authors, Emily Bronte and Jane Austen. The rest are all male writers. That's because there were so few until the 1900s. I wanted to show you an article. This is in USA Today, and it's from several years ago, but it's called Jane Austen, the Hero of Her Own Story. And the part that I like is when it numbers off why we should study Jane Austen now, or why she's such a big deal. Why are we interested in her, and why are they still making films about her stories? So they number them off. 1, she's modern. Can you guess why? Why would we call her modern? Late 1700s, early 1800s. Her language is technically modern, yes, but it's because her writings are timeless. She's talking about things that we can relate to, you know, people who think that they're better than others, love, snooty, wealthy people. Like, I mean, we get this. It's a world that we can identify with. They just wear different costumes. Okay. 2, she's a feminist, and that has definitely had an upward trend over the last century. And so for her to turn down a marriage proposal for someone who could take care of her is like, what? Who does that? You know, during that time, because if that was your way out, you knew you were going to be provided for, to say no, completely absurd. So it's not that she's anti-men, it's that she didn't behave like women of her time. Number 3, and you know, I'm kind of crossing over with Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen because I see her in her character. Okay, number 3, she's a comedic genius. You will laugh in parts of it if you're like, that's ridiculous. It's supposed to be. You're supposed to laugh like, what is wrong with all these people? 4, some people like her because she's old-fashioned. She speaks to a time period that we tend to romanticize. It's lovely. Do you know that there are Jane Austen festivals all over the world? The most popular ones are in Bath, England, once a year, Kentucky, and Australia. And they have huge events where you go for the weekend. For the men, they have like boxing. For the women, they have tea time. They have a grand ball. They have poetry readings, and they have special guests to come in and talk about Jane Austen. And everybody dresses in Regency era costume. So you're just like, I mean, the one in Bath happens in September, and every day I have to get on Facebook and watch what's happening with the Jane Austen Center because they're dressed so regally. Just walking the streets of Bath, which looks a lot like it did a couple of 100 years ago. And it's just so refined and nice. Number 5, Darcy, and Darcy. The newer Mr. Darcy, the one in the video you'll watch, I love that film because of Keira Knightley. Mr. Darcy, I'm like, he's okay. The reason is because the more popular Pride and Prejudice movie, which I will not force on you, is 5 hours long. And Darcy is Colin Firth. Who doesn't love Colin Firth? I mean, so you can watch the Colin Firth one if you want to, but it's long. I watched it one Sunday afternoon, and my husband is like, when will it end? But Colin Firth is the Mr. Darcy. Last one, number 6. Number 6, she died young and left a small body of nearly perfect novels. Those who analyze literature that classify what it takes to write the great novel would say she hits every one of the target points. 6 perfect novels by the age of 41 puts a 42-year-old to shame. If you heard my devotion the other day, she's one of those that is just like, I'm underachieved. You know? Fantastic writer. So I hope that you enjoy that. I have a little bit of a Museum of Dedication to Her. If you want to look, these are various art pieces that former England students have made as part of the notebook that honor students will put together. The directions should be self-explanatory, but again, that one's not due till March. We'll end with Virginia Woolf's comment at the bottom of the page. Virginia Woolf, who is a famous writer, female writer, and famous feminist, she said, Jane Austen is the most perfect artist among women. Pretty interesting recommendation. Any questions? Okay, bundle up. I'll see you later.